My name is Carl Quo, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Today, we're talking with Leah Hoyer of Level-Headed Games. Leah's founding moment was a bit thrust upon her and is perhaps emblematic of a story I often hear told in the industry. A team that was laid off, coming together and striking out on their own as a startup. As you'll hear, it's not all smooth sailing, especially as often the market conditions that created the layoffs also create challenges in the funding environment. That said, there is a path through that Leah and her team have walked, and it was great to hear her reflections on that journey so far. Let's jump in. How I normally like to start is to dig into sort of the origin of the founding, right? Like what pushed you over the edge to found a studio? And I think everyone sort of has a different way that they reflect on it. I reflect on it as like there was a moment that I'm like, okay, no, I am now mentally and emotionally committed, and I can sort of reflect about what got me to that point. But other folks I've talked to have been like, no, it just sort of happened. I don't know. So like, how did you end up at that moment where it's like, oh, I am for realsies starting a company, and what sort of led to that?
Absolutely. Well, we got a bit of a kick in the butt to do it, actually. And in late 2020, I joined Wizards of the Coast to spearhead the development of a brand new IP that started off as a digital game. So it was neither D&D, wasn't Magic, and was digital native, but then could, of course, expand into the various other things that Wizards and Hasbro does. And over the course of the next couple of years, we built up a team of about a dozen people, and we investigated a lot of potential ideas and prototyped several. And we ultimately had our favorite idea. We got it greenlit into pre-production, and we were moving forward. We were ahead of schedule and we were under budget. And then the economic downturn happened. And at that point, Wizards and Hasbro had to make some cuts, just in terms of what they were spending on R&D. And one of the razors that they were using from just a business point of view was, we would prefer to support existing franchises over new IP. And look, on some level, like, I completely get it, as much as it was sort of gut wrenching for us. But our studio, we were on the bleeding edge of the kind of studio closures and layoffs and various things. But they gave us all a few months of notice. We were there and actually made most of us offers to do other jobs within the greater organization. But the truth is, that's not why the team really came there. We wanted to be making this new thing, and we really believed in it. And instead, therefore, of trying to kind of put some square pegs into round holes and stay in the same area, I made a deal with them to move it over to what was an LLC that I just had in my back pocket, sort of for my DBA activities. And we made a deal to move the rights to that over to us. And it was certainly, I was aware that it was going to be a founder's journey, but it also, we had strong belief in what we were doing. There were several people who, were part of the team at Wizards who came along for that journey. And it just was something I think I'd always really wanted to do. And it just felt like the right time because, bluntly, we now had some assets and some work and a lot of love and passion that we'd already done. And we had a willing partner in Wizards in terms of them, wanting to honestly, like, to give them a lot of credit, they wanted to do right by the team as much as possible. I know it gutted them to have to do layoffs. And this was before we realized like how bad it was going to be, right? Like we were told pretty close to 3 years ago now, like towards the end of 2022. And we all had jobs until somewhere in February of 2023. Um, but that was really just when the first things started to happen. And, to their credit, they were like, well, if we can help give you a leg up then on the next thing. And so that was really what got it going.
Getting almost thrust into a founder's journey. I mean, you had sort of said that you had thought about founding companies, and you
Hmm.
sort of knew that like it was on your bucket list for last lack of a better term, right? But now you found yourself thrust into that situation, but with a lot of passion, a lot of drive because you had this thing. What did you realize? Okay, I'm doing this, so now I need to go out and learn this and this and this. Like, how did you process that list of things of like, okay, well, I have the sort of game and IP part done, I guess, but now it's a company, and so talk to me about
Yeah,
that.
it was quite I had done a few things sort of as solo ventures before. Like way back before I really got into entertainment, I actually was an attorney and I opened up my own law office and I'd done some things doing work for clients or at one point in my career it felt like the right time to do some consulting. And so I sort of hung out a consulting shingle and I'd done that. But this was the first time that it really was a company and a team endeavor, and really pushing forward. It's very different when you're brought on to help other people as part of your business and doing a service business than it is saying, we are going to make products. We are going to be a place where people work. We are going to be a company that grows and not just survives, but thrives. And how do we make that happen? And can we make that happen? So there were kind of no end of new discoveries. And I will say, I think most founders will agree that in the now 2.5 years or so that we've been doing this, I don't think there's been a 2.5 year period of my life when I have learned more professionally than doing this. And part of it is nobody else is gonna solve the problem for you if you're not. So a lot of times you're just like, I didn't want to have to deal with lease on some equipment or what have you, or what kind of firewall software we need on our computers to actually appropriately handle the things that we need. There was always a department who ordered the pens, right? I mean, it just comes down to all those little things. Um, and being able to balance those and prioritize them, I think has been the only thing that's kind of kept me sane and kept me going. Um, but yeah, certainly, I mean, I never really thought that I would have to understand cap tables and safe notes and things. And now I do. I do it even though I am an attorney with the backup of other attorneys, though. Like, you surround yourself with people who, when the questions really matter, you surround yourself with other people who are experts in those areas and you learn what you need to and you bolster your team up when you need to.
I think every person who goes on the founder journey eventually gets the questions from some other budding or potential founder who's like, well, tell me what I should know, right? And I guess, when it's always an impossible task to distill it down, but as best you can from that sort of like being thrust into a founding journey perspective, what's the biggest lesson or learning that you would sort of like give to someone on the cusp of the same decision point of, I think I'm going to start a thing, right?
Yeah, I think it's amazing to be passionate about what you're doing, but your passion can't drive your decisions. I think we have managed to still survive a really tumultuous 2.5 years, in part because we kind of looked at the reality of the situations and came out thinking our reality might be one way and finding it being very different and finding making critical changes when we needed to make them. I think that is core of it. That's not to say that we pivot every month, because I actually think that's a recipe for disaster. But when it comes up, when it comes to moving things and moving them forward, being really aware of what you can do. And as a person who came from a lot of, AAA or larger studio backgrounds, when you move into an indie space, despite the amount of experience that you and your team might have, you are not capable of making things at the scale and to certain levels as a lot of the models that I had previously worked within or looked at. Um, so, also, one thing that I wished I had done even sooner was really early on scale back our product to a thing that we were still very excited to make, but that felt like it was more honestly achievable and doable, because no one is really paying for your game until you get it out there. So, how can you do the best that you can to say, what is the core, good, exciting product that I'm excited to put out into the world? But how can I bring that down? Like, we did that exercise about just shy of a year in. We came to the realization that what we came out of Wizards with, like what they were going to spend helping to make this game, we were never going to be in a situation where we were going to have the resources, even with the kind of streamlined, efficient team you can get when you're a small group constantly talking to each other. That can only save you so much, right? So we underwent a an exercise maybe about 9 months in or so, that was, how do we find big fun in a small corner of our universe? How do we really leverage the things that we were doing to make something that we're still excited to make and that we think is going to be a lot of fun and that fans are going to love, but that really keeps it to a scale that is a legitimately indie, even triple I, but indie scale. And that would be the thing that if I could do it all over again, I would do that a lot faster.
Well, you mentioned, you had sort of started on this whole project really with a team of 12, and then this separation from Wizards happened, not entirely of your own volition. And then you started from that experience you started the studio. I'm curious to hear how much of that original team came with you. From that, how did the co-founder situation sort of play out initially, and just what was that sort of situation going into it?
Yeah, our co-founder situation was obviously probably not super normal because of the fact that we already had a team. There were three co-founders who then were all working on that at the same time, who all kind of committed to dive in and work together. There were a couple other folks who were definitely more, say, junior on the team, who were either working with us fairly full time or were kind of in kind of piecemeal, kind of one off things, being able to work with us still, and bring some skills to areas where we really needed it. I think we kind of by necessity needed to not be 12 people
Yeah,
coming
yeah, yeah,
straight out of that.
of course.
Um, so we sort of rolled out with a team of 4 or 5. And that therefore kind of happened somewhat organically, based on the fact that there were already, three people, the three people who were sort of already in leadership positions, moved into that. And that was, our tech director, and a person who was really in charge of sort of the kind of world building of the game. And then myself, who was in charge of sort of studio operations and the, greater design side of things as well. Um, and then we had other folks who worked there, but that was the initial group. And that group of folks really stayed together for about the first year or so. And over the course of time, it was just like, here's the honest thing when you're thrust into that sort of thing. I think everyone knew that the founder's journey was not going to be easy, but the sort of realities of life start to set in because we weren't paying ourselves. Um, we weren't in a lifestyle that was going to work for everyone in the long term. Like we were paying the non-founders some money certainly, but the life comes up, and so the other co-founders um, kind of one about a year in and one maybe about a half year after that um, really had to go, back into the workforce and take jobs that were going to, allow them to support their families and do various other things. And to be honest, like the great thing is we're all still friendly. They advise in their areas when need be. They're kind of there as, backdrop. And that's been really great, and I'm happy that like our friendships have all survived and all of that too. um, but I think there is, when you speak about the things that you learn, you also realize I think I've always been a person who was fairly entrepreneurial about things. And not everyone is, and that's totally okay. I think there's when it comes to even just managing people, but as you sort of look at your coworkers, some people are very comfortable in more ambiguity and truly like the independence. But the truth is, almost everyone will say that they want more autonomy. They want more independence. They want to be on the new thing rather than the, fourth expansion of the same IP that they've been on, because new is exciting, but new is also scary. And new, after a while, can really wear on people. That just is a reality of that. And I think as you move forward in any kind of journey like this, at some point, some folks are going to realize, hey, right now at this point in my life, I need I need something more stable. Not that the AAA world out there is particularly stable, but it is steady paychecks and it is health insurance and it is all that other stuff that, for them, and particularly when you have a family, it's a really different situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in the best of co-founder sort of dating and alignment and journeys, you still have the situations where people realize that what they thought a founder's journey would be or what they thought startup life was does not one to one match up with what reality is. And sometimes that's about like the time that you do it, right? Like we're in a particularly tough time for startups in the game industry, right? But sometimes it's just like you thought you wanted a thing and you turns out you don't really want that thing. And you
Or you
came,
could have really wanted it and your life changes,
yeah,
like that's
100%. And and that's in the best of times, and you guys were sort of you were thrust into it, and like I think it's you had that momentum behind having a team, having an idea, having an IP, having that excitement that I think can carry you further, and perhaps not have the conversations that you always should have when you're suddenly going into this, right? Or in your guys' situation, maybe not even realizing that there were conversations to have. It was just follow the momentum, right? I'm curious, as you went on that year and a half, and people are starting to have, whether it's life changes or realizing what the journey is and where they're going to be strong and where things aren't going to line up to what they need. What were the most sort of important conversations? Because I think you often hear about co founders falling out of a business and that being something that's pretty full of strife, genuinely. And like a lot of times, more often than not, I haven't talked a lot about it on the podcast because a lot of times when people lose co-founders, they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. It's like super stressful, it's super toxic, I don't want to do anything. But it sounds like you guys came through that pretty well, right? Like, they're still advising, they're still, in touch with the business in many ways. So I'm curious, as you went on that journey, as the co-founder who has sort of continued to carry the business, talking to those co-founders as they made those realizations, what were those really important conversations that helped not only identify that it was the right thing for them to move away, but also laid the groundwork for that to be a relatively positive experience, right?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it was a true mutual respect between all of us. Like, you almost always go into business with people who you are friendly with, right? And there is that part of we legitimately care about each other as humans at the end of the day. And so that I think was a big part of it. I think the other thing that really allowed it to go smoothly is sort of the timing of it and what else we were able to accomplish and sort of set up within the company as they potentially peeled off. So in the case of our tech director, like, we had a couple other engineers and had started working with an outsource company who had done some things and had gotten at least a foundation of how we worked on these, a foundation of training into the technology that we had already built. Um, so while that doesn't answer all of the many questions down the road of, your server infrastructure and all these various other things, we had at least set up kind of a how our technology org operates and what our priorities are. And a lot of that was already underway. Because the truth of the matter is, I think if she had made that same decision 3 months earlier, there's a good chance we probably would have closed down. Like it wasn't as viable for me to have operated without that, but we had gotten it to a point that I felt much more empowered and I felt more like we had the day to day backup of people I could trust to be there to answer a lot of those key questions and to partner on making some of the decisions we would have to make moving forward. So, I'm still really thankful that she did such a good job to get that going. And I'd say it's similar for more on the content side as well. Like, we had gotten to a place, and both of them, like, I completely understood it. They got great offers to be doing other things in a not great time to get other job offers, and in a way that both of them had like family obligations and other things, and it just, I think because we like and respected each other as humans first, and we were really kind of upfront about our needs, and it always kind of talked about that along the way too. Like, when was it going to get scary that this benefit was going to go away, or when was, things like unemployment, when were things like health insurance, when were things like all of these, um, we kept talking about that. So it wasn't a surprise. It's not like anybody came and walked in one day and did mic drop, I'm out. So I think that's what allowed it to happen, is that I think there was a part of us on some level that knew, and we're smart about at least. It's not quite succession planning because it's not like I had a new tech director who was just waiting there to step in, but um, that you understand that there's phases of the business and that there are greater periods of risk, and if we could weather those and get through them, then we had the wherewithal to keep going.
The last thing I want to sort of dig into here is, you went into this founder's journey expecting it to be have two co-founders helping to carry the business along the way, right? And I think, you know it's totally logical, and you can understand and respect the journey that has now led it to where you're suddenly a solo founder. But you also are now thrust into not just a founding journey, but a solo founding journey, which is often recognized as a very, very, like, it's the founding journey on hard mode, especially for some folks. So I'm curious how your thinking and processing that now as a solo founder? Do you think you'll remain like, it's always weird to bring in like quotey fingers founders later, like later in a business, but like, how do you handle going from I am one of three legs of the stool to, well, it's a single leg stool now and it's all on me?
I like the single leg stool. Um, I yeah, on some days it's just tough, like it. One of the greatest things that your co-founders can do for you is just to be there to talk and listen about things and to just know that you're all in this together, right? So there is that piece of it in particular that mentally I I think when the news came in that people were rolling out of the company, my main concern was about keeping the company going and keeping the team, the rest of the team working, and how is that all moving forward. Um, I underestimated, certainly at that time, what it was going to take to keep me going on some level. And that piece of it started to reveal itself then, in little, death by a thousand paper cuts moments, right? Where you start to go, oh, yeah, it would be nice to have that there. And so, once I came to that realization, I did make sure that there were other people, at least in sort of leadership roles on the team, or maybe who were going to consult or advise with us externally, that I could go to and talk about things and share at least some amount of the responsibility for the various things that you're responsible for. At the end of the day, it's most on the founders to, like, the buck stops there. They have the ultimate responsibility for things. But when you know that there are people who you can trust and who have your back, who can take some of the burdens of whether it be leadership or larger deliverables or um, other elements, like those were critical, and I still have a good number of those folks who are involved. And like I said, even still to some extent, the co-founders, I know I could call them up at any point and be like, hey, can I talk you through this problem, and they'd be there to talk about it, and that's great. But no amount of advisors are going to take on quite the same amount of burden as a founder, for sure. So there's stressful days, and there are days when I have definitely not taken care of myself enough. I have wound up in the hospital from not taking care of myself enough. Like and then that gives you that real awakening of, oh, something's got to give here. I need to be able to spread this around a bit more, or go back to the earlier point of set realistic expectations for what it is that we're able to do, whether it be on timeline, whether it be on the actual product, whether it be within the team and management. Um, yeah, yeah. It's There are a lot of great days, and then there are a couple days where you're like, "What am I doing here?" But I think that's a founder's journey, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is generally a founder's journey for sure, and I can definitely empathize. My first founding journey was a solo founder's journey, and so that definitely sounds like a lot of days on that trip. Uh, Switching topics a bit, could you tell us a bit how you're funded in whatever detail you feel comfortable sharing?
Absolutely. I'm happy to talk about this. Keep in mind, we basically made the call that we were going to do this right around January 1 of 2023, before anybody knew how much the floor had fallen out from the investment landscape, really, into games. And um, so I think we came into it with certain expectations of what we were going to be able to do. And the reality was quite different than that. Fortunately, we did raise some money, certainly not what we thought we did. We were accepted into the very first cohort of a 16Z speed run.
Mhm.
And that gave us a nice kind of cushion of pre seed funding. And then we had a few other angel investors that were also part of this. But bluntly, we are going to be, unless something else happens in the near term, we're going to be releasing our first game for a total budget of roughly $1 million. And so, yeah, that's it. A16Zs came out about the right time for us because we all kind of started focusing on this full time in early February, or sorry, mid February of 2023. I believe the applications opened for that probably within about 2 months or so. And so I've been talking to investors. Um, the nice thing about the career that I've had is had either a lot of connections or a lot of warm introductions to the connections that I needed. Like I was talking to a lot of people, but it became very clear at the time that people were being cautious. There wasn't a lot of stuff that was on the table, and they were kind of like, okay, well, we'll think about this. And even in A16Z's like speedrun program, I think they were even surprised by how much by the time we did our kind of investor showcase at the end of the program, um, how much things were different than I think what they expected would come on as like follow on investments and all of that. And so we, that part of it, it was the reality of it. And that and some other just looking at the realities of where we were and what we were trying to make. That's what really made, honestly, I was the one who, kind of pulled the ripcord and sat down with the team and said, we need to make some changes on what it is that we think that we're making. And how are we going to do something that we're still really excited about, because I'm not ready to like give up on the idea of doing this, but we're not going to be making a game for $25 million. We're going to, let's shift. Um, the reality is, I actually think the scarcity of money in many ways forced me to be smarter about what we were doing. And just realize like the resourcefulness that we have and the connections and how do we pull those together. Like a lot of founders go into the game space without really having made a lot of games. And something that does set myself and my co-founders apart is like, hey, we knew a lot of people. We, at least if we didn't know the answer, I knew someone who would. We knew how to have discussions. I knew how to talk to different folks. I'd spoken at conferences around the globe and therefore could get like had connections with other studios who might help us be able to do more with less money. So that really got us into, I think, smart business operation mode. Don't get me wrong, I wish someone had given us a check for $20 million, but the truth of the matter, and I think a lot of founders might even hate me for saying this, like, no one's entitled to be given checks for millions of dollars to make a game that you are passionate about. That's not why people invest in companies. They invest in companies because they believe this company is going to make a lot of money. And the truth is, games right now are pretty speculative on some level. Like you can put out something that is great, and that doesn't guarantee that millions of people are going to pay you billions of dollars for it. um, so I think pretty early on, I realized that one of the big bullets in my job description was, how do I not need other people's money to the best extent that I possibly can?
I think you know we founded in a very similar time frame, right? Like we talked to the A16Z folks for the very first speedrun as well, and um, it's definitely been a very interesting journey around fundraising. And I think, many founders I've talked to, even when times are good, fundraising is not their most favorite part of the journey by any means. It is generally something that most founders don't like, and most founders find very hard. I'm curious what aspect of fundraising in the journey, especially in this kind of environment, has been sort of personally the most hard for you.
To me, it was the expectation that had been set up for the few years previous that then became almost like the talking points that anybody would be like, oh, well, this is what should be happening. And then to realize, though, that for so many different reasons, it was economic downturn. It was actually probably a misinvestment on behalf of a lot of those large written checks, and like a kind of misunderstanding of where the money would be coming from, to return that and how likely that was. And um, I think bluntly, VCs in particular, and more straightforward games companies like game studios are pretty strange bedfellows, actually. They're not particularly aligned on a lot of their goals. And so the constant buzz in your ear that this should be the way that you're raising your money and you should be able to find this if you've got something good and if you've got a reputation that people are willing to invest in, and then the realization of how much at that same time, aside from the fact that the coffers were drying up, those people who had been investing in games were largely like moving away from sort of game studios proper into game adjacent kind of things that matched more closely with the tech businesses that they were more used to investing in. You look at the composition of speedrun as an example, and in our cohort, there will never be another speedrun. At least this is my take. Um, there will never be another speedrun that invests in the same percentage of studios as there were in our first one. I think they started to then invest more in um, B2B services, things with a lot of like AI tooling, maybe certain platform technologies, that kind of thing. And I understand why. Like, I get it. It matches up with what VC and the sort of Silicon Valley model tends to move towards. Content is like, we can all say content is king, but content is so much scarier and it's less understood. It's squishy, it's creative, and that is, doesn't always align with the sensibilities of kind of your most traditional investors. So,
As you've navigated this journey, right? Like there's any number of ways that a founding journey can be hard, simultaneously, usually for an individual. But if you reflect over the time you've been going so far, what do you feel like personally your biggest struggle has been being in this sort of role that you are, right? Like what have you what just rubs against all of the weaknesses or insecurities or pieces of how you operate that makes it particularly hard, and how have you been approaching dealing with that, right? And so that you don't go to the hospital from stress.
um, I think the hardest thing for me on some level has been those things that it has been such a huge blessing that I have had a good career at a lot of well respected companies. And what has been great is I've tended to have a really strong relationship with other departments within those organizations so that I at least understand that things need to be done in these areas. But I also truly understand that I am not the expert in how to do this. I would say for me, not um, the the marketing side of things, which is so unbelievably important for founders. Like that the go to market planning is something that I actually respect tremendously and want to be spending as much time as I possibly can on it. But it is also not my area of expertise. And the indie model for go to market is so different than what I was dealing with before. In in a larger studio, you're at a Bungie, you're at an Xbox, or even a Telltale. Um, they handle go to market entirely differently. And I think there was for me a certain amount of paralysis on the, oh, well, everyone said that you have to keep everything super down low, and not like say anything about the game that you're working on until you have this big release and reveal. And that's such a AAA model and one that I don't even know totally works even in its own space anymore. And so the thinking about planning for a sense of an announce cadence, a social media cadence, a Discord cadence, and all of that uh, really for quite a while was a bit just paralyzing, I would say, on some level, because I was so afraid of doing it wrong, I guess, that I think I had to finally wake up and be like, yeah, but now months have gone by and you kind of haven't done anything. That has to stop. And how do you start to move forward and say, look, you're just going to have to start doing things and talking about stuff and getting it together. Um, and, fairly recently, I've surrounded myself now with more partners and um, other folks who can really help with that. And the amount of stress relief I felt once I felt like I had started talking to and having in my corner people who understood that more, I think was just so worth it. So, yeah.
What other sort of like primary support structures have you sort of put around yourself, to support you as an individual going on this journey, right? Like I think there's a lot of places where um to the point you just made of like having experts, having advisors, having stuff that help with, okay, how do I do this thing within the business, or within the game, right? Is one aspect, but just sort of the stress, the anxiety, the feeling the weight of the business, and all that kind of stuff that is endemic to the founder's journey. What have you put in place around yourself to just manage yourself in a lot of ways, and support yourself?
Yeah, I'd say several networks of co founders have probably been some of the greatest things to be able to rely on, even if it's just a hey, this totally crappy thing just happened to us this week. I just need to vent, or can I get your perspective? There are several other people I was in a cohort with in speedrun that we get together about once a month, on over like some sort of Zoom type call and just compare notes. And actually, I will say, we try not to compare notes. I think that's the comparing your startup to other people's startups is probably the surest way to be an unhappy founder,
Hmm.
right? So it's less about comparing how we're doing as much as sharing how we're doing and being there to support one another. I am fortunate also that I live um, like Seattle area where we have a great indies community here. And like you also know, like what happens, there are a ton of events you can go, and sure, there's a lot of folks who are trying to break into things, or they're just maybe they're in school doing something. We also have those like more experienced games industry folks who are doing something very similar, and I can kind of relate to them and we can talk about how that's going. Um, I spend a lot of time petting my dog. There's, and I'm trying, I will say, especially over the last several months, to really make uh, my own kind of health, well-being, fitness as good as it possibly can. Like after a while, I'd sort of stopped working out the way I used to because I was like, oh, I don't have time to do that today. And now it's a bit more like, I don't know that I have time to not do that today. I need to go out and I need to kind of clear my head, feel better. I need to sweat. I need to, you know, just make my body move, because sitting in front of your computer all day long, constantly thinking about this one thing is really tough. Um, but the truth is, yeah, I'm not a great sleeper. I um, bolt upright at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about something that's not getting done far too often. And when that starts to happen more proximate to each other, I know I need to call up someone in my support network and be like, hey, can we just talk? Can we, and then it's friends, family, partner, like just the being able to take some downtime and try to balance your life. I'm excited that it's football season. I love spending a lot of time deep couch sitting on a Sunday, seeing how my fantasy teams are doing. And, like there's
Mhm.
just, and allowing myself that, because sometimes it's easy to do that and be stressed about what you're not working on. I try to tamp that down as much as possible.
That's awesome. As you sort of think about the next 6 to 12 months, right? What is on that, for a startup, that's kind of a long-term horizon, uh, for, both yourself, and your founder's journey, as well as obviously the company that, it dominates that perspective. And what are you thinking a lot about? What are you planning for? What are you mentally preparing for?
Yeah, it should be a really exciting next 6 months for us, to be honest, because we are at the place we have been alpha testing. Our game is online multiplayer. Um, it's cooperative. It's fun. It's very. It's it's a game that I actually really enjoy playing, and that's great. And we have play tests with people on a regular basis. And now it's the point of just realizing that, hey, we should be pushing ourselves to be in first revenue in within the next half a year ish. And so that is a lot. Like there's a lot that comes along with it. We're actually going to be kind of demoing our game at Geek Girl Con here in Seattle in like another, I don't know, not very many days. Um, and it's just the getting it out, getting it in more people's hands, getting the legitimate reactions so we can also make more of the refinements. And it's not to say we're shutting it down, because it's actually also live service online multiplayer, so it doesn't really shut down, but it is we have a finite set of things that we're doing now to actually get this out there, be in first revenue, and just because at some point you can keep noodling on something forever.
Mhm.
Um, and it's it's time, both from a financial standpoint. We can't afford to keep this going for forever, but also like we've really got a good, interesting game that's there. And so it's like, what are the pieces that we need to put into place to get it out into the public marketplaces, right? Um, and that's, oh, that's so exciting to just put it out there. And, there's of course so much trepidation about what could or could not happen because of that. But at the same time, I'm just so ready for it. I'm just excited that we're now in this kind of um, true kind of go to market phase of our game. Um, and that's just the product, right? Then it's thinking about the company itself. For most founders, particularly doing something like this, your first product and your company are, fairly in lockstep with each other, right? But it is thinking about, okay, well, what will it look like after we launch, how do we support this? What does that mean for the team, and how are we kind of thinking about our timeline post launch, and what does that look like for us? Because I truly came into the idea of starting a studio not to make a game. Like, to be honest, while we had this game that we had started, it was less about that and more like we were trying to build up a studio within Wizards, and that still holds true for me. I would like to make a company that lasts, for the long haul and is putting out this game and many things to support it, and maybe another incarnation of it or the next thing. And so, how are we thinking about this? Um, kind of or sort of maybe it's an early access beta launch or whatever that is not like this launch is not our end point. It's a point on the journey of the company, and how do we make sure that we're addressing it as such?
I like to wrap up the main part of the interview with a somewhat unfair question, which is, given the experience so far, if we move forward some amount of time, we won't make a call of the fate of the current studio. But would you ever found another company?
Oh, I would, in part because, good God, I didn't go through all of this to learn everything that I've learned now and not put that to more use. So if this were to shutter for reasons, you know, um, I would be so much better at doing this again that I think absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's always, I mean, it's always interesting to me to ask that question, but I think especially in your situation, I was curious because many people go into a founding journey and sort of like with that idea of like, oh, I'm doing this one, but I want to be entrepreneurial, I want to start a studio, I want to do all these things, and like this is a plan. And so like they think about it and they're like, yeah, of course I would do another one, like that was the plan all along. Whereas being sort of thrust into the situation, I could totally see being like, I've enjoyed this journey and I've also learned, nope, not anymore, never again, right? So it's cool to hear you come through and be like, no, I feel like I've picked up a set of skills and I want to continue to use those skills. I enjoy using these skills, right?
I do. I definitely do. And the as frustrating and as scary as so many of the days can be, uh, I really do kind of close up the week every week going, yeah, I like what I'm doing. I really do like what I'm doing. And I, given the current state of also our industry, on some level, the smaller the kind of indie studios, the even the indie, the triple I, the double A, like all of those studios, I feel like are where the real future and successes of the industry are. We're holding the fate of the industry in our hands now, just as much as it used to just be all those big triple A players and publishers. Um, and because I care about the industry, I don't always like it. I don't always like this industry. Like, I love games, but it's been hard to like a lot of things about the industry in the last, few years. And I think creating a company, creating that company culture, creating the culture of your game and of your fans and all of that as well, like that's a place that really I think is so necessary also for what the future of gaming is going to be. But also, yeah, on a personal level, I enjoy it. I love my team. I love um, I really do love what we're working on. I love seeing fans get delighted by it. I like all of that. And the satisfaction that comes from that combined with the amount of growth that I and the rest of the team I think are going through by going through this journey are just so great that yeah, if again it all just evaporated for reasons, and that can happen in the games industry, I would most likely sign up to kind of do my own thing again, hopefully with founders that are around.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And hopefully with a nicer funding market.
Yeah, Yeah, or that's the other thing is thinking differently about funding. I think that would be something that is such a great learning from what I've gone in and done this time around and the experiences that we've had is the VC market may never come around on these same sorts of things, right? But that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities for really interesting creative funding and partnerships and other things that could be out there. And how do you think about that more at that seminal moment of deciding to move forward is understanding who those really who those partners might be and in a way that is truly a partnership because I do think too many people come into this right now thinking they've got to find the money to back their idea and their studio and truthfully I think it's much more of like who can your business partners be where your goals are all aligned with one another and how can that be a win-win on all sides not just money comes in one direction and goes out the other and then hopefully comes back to them but how can your content goals align? How can your business organization goals align in such a way that it make sense for people to be your business partners and to be your co-owners and investors in things.
So, how I always close out the podcast is with the introspection lightning round, which these questions came from my own efforts at co founder dating. These were often a set of questions that I would use really ahead of even our first meeting of like, hey, I would give these to someone that I would be sitting down with. We would both answer them, show up, compare answers, see how we would, line up as co-founders. And instead, I'm going to ask them to you in lightning round fashion to get your answers. And the one I always start with is, what is your superpower?
My superpower truly is I'm a pretty balanced left brain, right brain person. I come with both a MFA in animation and an experience in that side of things and a law degree. And while I will say there are better business managers out there and there are better creatives out there, there are very few people who are as high on the scale on both of them as I am. And so being able to get the best creative um, while still living with inside the realities of the business is I think where my true superpower lies.
Outside of your superpower, what are your biggest strengths?
I think my empathy is probably a really strong strength. I think I tend to build really good high functioning teams. Um, and that sort of combined with my years of experience in um, both the video games and entertainment industries means I have a network that is such a strong strength. It's just such a great personal strength to be able to call up folks to help find solutions to my problems. Um, and, them knowing that I would do the same for them. People are willing to help. And I think that's amazing.
What are your big weaknesses?
For as much as I say that empathy is my strength, I would say there is a gap in there in the fact that I am a wildly independent person who likes to be given a problem and be able to find the solution. And I think that's why entrepreneurship works pretty well for me. It's not a perfect 100% fit, but it works pretty well. I have to constantly remind myself that not everybody that I work with has that same mentality and has the same outlook on their type of work. I think I live naturally in fear of micromanaging or over explaining things, which all too often means that I under explain things left to my own devices. And I need to remind myself that especially the great thing about having a small team is I have zero excuse for not knowing where people sit on that spectrum, right? But I still make mistakes. I still am like, yeah, here, we're aligned on this. And then, something comes back and you're like, where did this come from? How, like, or I'll then get 20 different questions as they're like trying to make sure that they're going to deliver the right thing, as an example. And I do really frequently need to remind myself that sometimes people want more explanation. They want more time to kind of be able to go back and forth and process something together and that kind of thing.
What behaviors are your stress reactions? So, like, when you're under a lot of stress, how does your behavior in the workplace change?
I think on a positive level, when I'm under a lot of stress, the things that I will spend more time doing is being very clear about expectations and making sure I go back to something and look at the priorities and make sure that they are still the right priorities. I think on the negative side, it is the um, like getting stressed out or upset, like, how did this person not understand? How are we so on the different page of something? And so to keep me from kind of getting to that like annoyed place that I think a part of me wants to jump to, then I, kind of have to make sure I just take a little bit of time. I love kind of a good Excel sheet of just brain dump and then prioritizing different things that are out there. That in and of itself calms me down. But it also I've found to be a really good tool to then go back to the team. Um, and a much better one than me like being clearly annoyed that something wasn't done the right way or that someone's priorities were out of whack with what mine were. So yeah, that's probably the thing that I try to lean into the planning and prioritization and communication side more than the outward showing of frustration side.
And then the final one is, what are the things you need to have happen regularly in the workplace in order to keep yourself more even keel, not going into a stress reaction? I call these sort of like, since you're ancillarily familiar with magic through connection to wizards, I call these your upkeep needs, the things
Yep.
that need to just happen on a regular basis that keep you sane.
Yep. I think there are some rituals that we have as a team that I love. Like we do a weekly play test together and we're all there. And that I always walk away from that feeling great, even when we find a lot of bugs or even when something we tried doesn't work, because you just get the team together, kind of all on the same page. Our game is cooperative. So we're working towards things. And I think that's been so incredibly helpful for us as just an organization. We also recently have switched to a 4-day work week. And I have found, while I still do a bit of the kind of necessary businessy management things, not anything related to product, but things related to the business and to process on Fridays. I allow myself time there to really then feel like I've recharged over the weekend. So as a founder, you never shut it off. We just can admit to that. But I have found that we are just as productive and people come back with this. I mean, part of it we did for financial reasons. I'll be honest. It's not like it's purely about the, mental stability of everyone on the team. While I care about that deeply, what I have found is I come back on Monday truly feeling like I've managed to give myself the break and refresh that I need to actually tackle the next week in a strong way. So I might still do some amount of work 7 days a week because that's just what we do as founders. You think about an idea, and I will stress about it if I don't write it down or do something about it. The fact that I can go on a hike with my dog in the middle of Friday and just be okay because there's not something that's coming in really has made a huge difference. And this has been a fairly recent change for us. And to be honest, I'm so happy we did it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I'm really grateful that you shared your journey with us and spent the time. If folks want to learn more about your studio, what you're working on, or ask you follow-up questions of anything they heard, what's the best way to learn all that information and get in touch with you?
Absolutely. Well, if you go to levelheadedgames.com, there's a little info form you can fill out if you say that you had heard this and wanted to ask me some questions. That will get routed to me. I will get back to you. That's also the way that if you're interested in being part of an upcoming playtest or want to get an invite to our Discord, which for a short period of time is still hidden, you can, find it all that way. And it's just levelheadedgames.com. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to connect with other founders. So you can reach out to me there as well.
Amazing. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. It was a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carl. This has been great.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founders support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.